The wagon wheel ceased its grinding complaint, sinking into the ankle-deep dust of the main street. For 3 weeks, that sound had been the only thing separating one agonizing mile from the next. Now, the silence was louder. Eleanor kept her eyes down, waiting. The back of her neck burned, a deep, stinging sunburn that had blistered and peeled and now felt tight as a drum. Dust coated her eyelashes and filled the cracks in her lips. She tasted alkali and despair. Her fingers cramped around the rope handle of her single battered satchel. It held everything she owned: one change of clothes, a bar of lye soap wrapped in cloth, a tintype of a woman she no longer resembled, and the letter was folded into a small square, tucked against her ribs, a constant, crinkling reminder of this bargain. It promised her hand in marriage, a new life, to a man named Cole Rollins, a man she had never seen. The wagon driver, a weary man named Silas who had not spoken more than 10 words to her since leaving the railhead, cleared his throat. "This is it, miss, end of the line." She did not move. She heard the heavy crunch of boots on the dry earth. A shadow fell over her, blocking the relentless white sun. The shadow was tall. She forced herself to look up. He was part of the landscape. He seemed carved from the same unforgiving rock and sun-bleached wood as the town itself. Cole Rollins was a towering man, broad in the shoulders from a life of labor, narrow in the hips. A dusty black hat was pulled low, but it could not hide the severe lines of his face or the coldness in his eyes. They were the color of a winter sky, and they looked at her not as a person, or even as a woman, but as cargo. He was an ex-Union scout, the letter had said, now a cattleman. He looked only like a man who had seen too much and felt too little. He said nothing. His gaze flickered from her face, to her satchel, and then to Silas. Eleanor watched his hand move. Not to help her, not to greet her, but to his pocket. He drew out a single coin, silver in the glare, and tossed it to the driver. The sound of it slapping into Silas's palm was sharp, final, a purchase. Cole Rollins turned. He did not offer a hand. He did not speak her name. He simply began to walk, his long legs eating up the dusty ground, his spurs ringing a quiet, metallic rhythm. He expected her to follow. Eleanor's breath hitched. For a moment, her legs refused to obey. This was it. This was the man who now owned her. She gathered her skirts, thick with trail dirt, and climbed awkwardly over the wagon's side. Her boot hit the ground with a soft puff of dust. Silas did not look at her. He was already turning the mules, eager to leave. She was alone with him. She hurried to keep up, her satchel bumping against her thigh. The town of Redemption was 2 rows of crude buildings facing each other in a permanent standoff. A general store, a saloon whose bat-wing doors swung even with no one passing, a blacksmith's forge dark and silent. The townsfolk stared. She felt their eyes like insects crawling on her skin. A woman in a gray bonnet paused, her hand on a sack of flour, and watched Eleanor trail behind the cattlemen. 2 men lingering on the boardwalk of the saloon stopped their low conversation, their eyes lingering on her form. The whispers followed her, carried on the hot, dry wind. "Mail-order bride? Rollins actually did it. Poor thing. Look at him. He does not even want her. He will break her inside a week. Poor girl. Poor foolish girl." Eleanor locked her eyes on the broad, straight back of the man in front of her. She would not look at them. She would not cry. Crying was a luxury, like soft beds and clean water. She had left all that behind. Here, there was only survival. The walk was long, nearly 2 miles past the edge of the dying town. The land opened up, vast and empty, stretching to a horizon of bruised purple mountains. The sky was too big. It pressed down on her, made her feel small and crushable. The homestead was not a ranch. It was a scar on the land. A small, rugged cabin of unpainted timber sat in a patch of cracked earth. A lean-to barn stood beside it, looking as if one strong wind might claim it. There was no porch, no paint, no sign of welcome, only isolation. Cole Rollins did not pause at the door. He pushed it open, it scraped on the floorboards, and stepped inside. He dropped a heavy saddlebag onto a crude wooden table. Eleanor followed him in, her eyes adjusting to the dimness. The cabin was one room. A cold fireplace dominated one wall. A bed, little more than a frame with a thin mattress, was pushed into a corner. A table, 2 chairs. That was all. He had not stopped. He walked to the back, where a blanket hung over a doorway. He pulled it aside, revealing a smaller, meaner room. A lean-to kitchen, built as an afterthought. It held a cast-iron stove, a dry sink, and a single high window. He pointed. Kitchen. He turned, went back to the main room, and pointed toward the door. Barn. He looked at her, his gaze flat, his jaw set. He had given her the boundaries of her world. He offered no help with her satchel. He did not ask if she was hungry or tired from the journey. He just stood there, waiting for her to accept the terms. She held his gaze for a second, then gave a single, stiff nod. He seemed satisfied by her obedience. He picked up his saddlebag and walked out the front door, heading toward the barn. Eleanor stood alone in the silence. The cabin smelled of dust, old smoke, and something metallic. She let the satchel fall from her numb fingers. It hit the floor with a dull thud. She leaned against the wall, the rough wood digging into her spine, and closed her eyes, just for a moment. When she opened them, she moved with purpose. She looked out the window. Cole was in the corral, his back to her, tending to his horse. Quickly, she knelt by her satchel. She unfastened the leather straps and reached deep inside, past the spare dress. Her fingers brushed against the cloth-wrapped soap. And then, the cold steel. She pulled it out. It was a small knife, its blade no more than 4 inches long, the handle wrapped in worn leather. It was dull, but it was sharp enough. She looked around the room, frantic for a place. Her gaze settled on her own body. She lifted the hem of her dusty skirt and slid the knife, handle down, into her high-button boot. The cold metal rested against her calf. Her previous husband, a man whose name she never spoke, had been fond of kindness. He had used soft words and gentle touches right before his hand became a fist. He had taught her, in blood and bruises, never to trust a man's kindness. This man, Cole Rollins, offered none. She found she did not know which was worse. The knife was her only answer. She had just stood up, smoothing her skirt. When the door opened again, Cole filled the frame. He did not enter fully, just stood on the threshold, his shadow falling across the floor. He carried a rifle in the crook of his arm as if it were part of him. "The rules," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel. "You cook, you clean, you stay in the kitchen, or the house. You do not wander. You do not touch my rifles." He gestured with his chin toward the rifle resting on a rack against the far wall. Beside another, and a shotgun. His world was iron. Eleanor swallowed against the dryness in her throat. She nodded again. A muscle worked in his jaw. He looked at her sunburnt face and her thin frame, and she saw a flicker of something in his eyes. It was not pity. It was disgust, or perhaps resentment. He turned and left. She stood there, unmoving, as the sound of his footsteps faded toward the barn. Inside her, beneath the exhaustion and the fear, something small and hard ached. She had not come all this way, survived what she had survived, just to trade one prison for another. She did not come here just to survive. She had come to start over. The sun fell, and the desert turned cold with shocking speed. The nights were the worst. Elior built a small fire in the fireplace, using the few chips of wood stacked outside the kitchen door. It offered little warmth against the chill that seeped through the walls. She ate the last of her dry bread from the journey. She heard the heavy bar fall on the barn door. He was sleeping out there, with the animals, away from her. She spread her one spare blanket on the narrow bed, not bothering to undress. The mattress was thin, stuffed with dry corn husks that crackled every time she moved. The silence of the high desert was not silent at all. The wind moaned, a low, lonely sound that clawed at the corners of the cabin. And then, the coyotes began to cry, a series of high, yipping wails that sounded too human, like women weeping in the dark. Eleanor squeezed her eyes shut. The coyote cries blended with other sounds, sounds locked deep in her memory. She was not in the cabin. She was in the cellar, damp earth pressing against her face, the smell of root vegetables and her own blood in her nostrils. Above her, she heard the heavy thud of boots, shouting, the crash of glass, a man's voice, thick with rage, and then the scream, her own scream, muffled by her hand. She heard gunfire, a single, sharp crack that echoed in the small space. She jerked awake, her heart hammered against her ribs. It was just the coyotes, only the wind. She stared into the darkness of the cabin, her hand instinctively moving to the boot where the knife lay sleeping. She did not sleep again. 2 days later, the sky turned the color of a fresh bruise. The wind, which had been a constant, dry breath, turned sharp and cold. It began to howl, and by evening, it threw handfuls of stinging rain against the cabin. A storm had arrived. Eleanor was in the kitchen, trying to make a meal from the meager supplies Cole had left. A sack of flour, some beans, and salt. He had been gone since dawn. Checking traps, he had muttered. The cabin groaned. The wind shrieked, a physical force trying to tear the structure apart. Eleanor sat at the table, watching the single candle flame flicker and dance. A crash from outside, sharp and splintering, made her jump. It was followed by the terrified squawking of chickens. She grabbed the heavy shawl from her satchel and threw open the cabin door. The wind tore it from her grip, slamming it back against the wall. Rain and ice lashed her face. The small chicken coop, built of scrap lumber, was in ruins. The wind had ripped the roof off. The chickens, their only source of eggs, were scattered, screaming in the mud. Elle good night, or did not hesitate. She ran into the storm, her boots sinking in the cold mud. She did not call for Cole. He was not here. This was her work, the kitchen, the chickens. She spent all night in the freezing rain. She fought the wind to retrieve the terrified birds, grabbing them one by one and shoving them into the relative safety of the main cabin, where they clustered around the cold hearth, dripping and miserable. Then she went back out to save the coop. Her hands, already raw, grew numb. She found the splintered pieces of the roof and, using a heavy rock, tried to hammer them back into place. The wind fought her, ripping the boards from her grasp. She wept, silent tears of rage and frustration that the rain washed away instantly. She would not be beaten by this place. She found rope in the barn, his barn, but she did not care and tied the remaining slats down, her fingers too cold to manage the knots properly. She used her own body weight to hold the timber in place while she worked. By the time a weak gray light began to paint the eastern sky, the coop was a ruin, but it was a standing ruin. The storm was passing. Eleanor was soaked to the bone, covered in mud, and shaking so hard her teeth ached. She stumbled back inside, barred the door, and collapsed onto the cold floor, too tired to even make it to the bed. She woke to the sound of the cabin door slamming open. Cole Rollins stood there, framed against the gray evening light. He was back. He was covered in mud, his horse clearly visible behind him, steaming in the cold. The reek of whiskey rolled off him, a sour, angry smell. He looked at the chickens clustered by his hearth. He looked at the muddy floor. He looked at her, shivering where she had woken up. His face was dark. He said nothing about the storm. He said nothing about the coop. He moved to the table and threw something heavy onto it. A dead rabbit, limp and gray. Blood dripped onto the wood. He looked at her. His eyes narrowed. "You burn it. You starve." He turned, walked out, and slammed the door so hard the window rattled in its frame. Eleanor stared at the rabbit. She pushed herself up, her joints screaming in protest. She was still shaking, but a new, cold anger was settling in her stomach. She picked up the rabbit. She would cook. She would clean. She would survive. A week passed. They lived as ghosts, occupying the same small space but never touching, never truly speaking. He would leave before dawn, He would return after dark. He would sleep in the barn. She would cook the food, clean the cabin, and mend the coop. She needed supplies. The flour was low, the salt gone. She waited until he rode out one morning, then took the small cloth purse from her satchel. It held $3, all she had, and began the 2-mile walk to town. She kept her eyes down as she walked the main street, heading for the general store, but she could not block her ears. Inside the store, 2 women were talking by the fabric bolts. Mrs. Gable, the blacksmith's wife, and Mrs. Hemlock, who ran the boarding house. They saw Eleanor enter, and their voices dropped, but not enough. "Got that mail order bride out there?" "Mrs." Gable whispered, her voice sharp. "Heard him in the saloon last night. Drunk. Said he wished the storm had taken the whole place. It is a shame, Martha, a terrible shame. He is not right in the head, not since Sarah. Hush, he is just grieving." "Grieving? It has been 2 winters. Martha, that is not grief. That is poison. He sits by her grave, they say, and just talks to the dirt. He has not let anyone close since." Eleanor pretended to inspect a sack of beans. Her hands were very still. Sarah, that was his wife's name, Mrs. Hemlock leaned closer. "I heard it was awful. The raid. They say the Comanches. Well, they say he found her right by the creek. Shot. He killed 2 of them, but he was too late. He has not been right since. And now he brings this new one. This poor girl. It is like he is trying to punish the world for what he lost." Eleanor paid for her flour and salt, her face a calm, blank mask. She did not look at the women as she left. She walked back to the homestead, the words echoing in her head. Shot. Too late. He has not let anyone close. She understood his coldness now. It was not just hate for her. It was a wall built of grief. She knew about grief. She knew about being too late. That night, she could not sleep. The coyotes cried, but she heard only the women's whispers. She rose from the cot before dawn. The cabin was cold, the fire long dead. She walked to the small kitchen, to the window she had repaired. The glass was cracked, a spider web of lines distorting the world outside. The sun was just beginning to break the horizon. It bled orange and violent pink across the dark line of the earth. Eleanor stood watching it, watching the light try to push through the broken glass. She was so tired. She felt the chill deep in her bones, a cold that had lived there for years. She raised a hand, her fingers still stiff and sore from mending the coop. She did not press it to the cold glass. She pressed it, flat and trembling, against her own stomach. She bowed her head, and her lips moved, forming a single word, a name, a secret whispered into the dawn. "Daniel." The high desert ground was not soil. It was a crust of baked clay and rock, as resistant to life as Cole Rollins himself. Eleanor knelt beside the cabin, shielded from the worst of the wind, and attacked the earth with a rusted spade she had found in the barn. The handle was rough, and the wood bit into her palms, but she did not stop. She was carving a small patch, a rectangle of intention in the vast, uncaring wilderness. This was not his land. It was hers. She would make something grow. She had no seeds, but she had a purpose. On her walk back from town, she had gathered dried pods from the scrubby bushes, pocketing the tiny, hard seeds. She did not know what they were, if they were weeds or something that might one day bear fruit. It did not matter. She was planting. She worked for hours. The sun beat on her back, and the wind dried the sweat on her face, leaving streaks of salt and dirt. Her fingernails broke against the stones. From the corner of her eye, she saw him. Cole stood by the corral, ostensibly mending a bridle, but his body was angled toward her. He watched. He had been watching her for His silence was a physical weight, a judgment. He offered no help. He offered no water. He just watched, his face a mask of cold disapproval, as if her small act of cultivation was a personal insult. He had given her the kitchen. This patch of dirt was rebellion. She finished, patting the last of the disturbed earth with her raw hands. She would fetch water later, from the creek. She stood and looked at her work. It was a pitiful brown square, but it was a start. Her defiance did not end at the garden. The cabin itself was a statement of his grief. It was a place where a man had given up. The wind found every crack. A shutter on the main window banged a constant, dull rhythm against the outer wall. The window in the kitchen, the one she had stared through at the broken dawn, was still cracked. These were not her chores. He had said cook, clean, but she could not live inside his despair. She returned to the barn. This time, she did not flinch, expecting him to appear. She moved with a new right, the one she had declared when she buried the seeds. She found a hammer, its head loose, and a handful of bent nails. She spent the afternoon on the ground outside the window, pulling the shutter straight. It was heavy, and she fought the weight of it, her arms aching. She hammered the old nails, trying to straighten them on a flat rock before driving them back into the wood. Cole rode in as she was finishing. He dismounted, pulling his saddle from the horse's back. He watched her struggle with the last nail, her arms shaking from the effort. He did not move to help. He simply walked past her, throwing the saddle over the corral fence, and went into the barn. She finished. The shutter was crooked, but it was silent. It held. The next day, she fixed the stairs to the cabin. The bottom step had rotted through. A trap waiting in the dark. She found a thick plank behind the barn, discarded, forgotten, and dragged it to the front. She spent an hour prying the rotten wood loose, the sound of her labor loud in the stillness. This work was not for him. It was for her. Every nail she straightened, every board she replaced, was an anchor. She was fixing the house not because he was her husband, but because she was its inhabitant. She was refusing to live in a ruin. She had patched the broken kitchen window with a piece of oiled paper she had bought in town. It cast a warm, yellow glow in the small room, a soft light that felt like her own. Her movements were creating a new geography. The kitchen was hers. The garden was hers. The steps were hers. The main room, with his cot and his guns, was still his. The barn was his, and the land, he made clear, was his. She had taken to walking in the afternoons, after her chores, needing to feel the earth under her feet beyond the small perimeter of the house. She walked toward the south, where the land dipped down into a dry wash, thick with mesquite and pale, ghostly trees. He appeared as if from the ground itself, his horse cutting off her path. "You do not go south," he said. It was not a request. She stopped, shielding her eyes from the sun. "I was just walking. The south pasture. You stay away from it." His voice was flat but hard. "Outlaws pass through there, men moving stolen stock up from the border. They see a woman alone. They will not be gentle." She looked past him, at the empty, shimmering heat. "I did not see anyone." "You will not," he said. "Not until it is too late." He turned his horse. "Stay near the house. That is where you are safe." He rode off, leaving her standing in the dust. He was not protecting her. He was fencing her in. The main room of the cabin held his wife's ghost. Eleanor had cleaned it, swept the dust, but the emptiness remained. It was in the bare hooks on the wall where dresses must have hung. It was in the space beside his cot. One evening, while he was out, he was always out, checking lines, hunting, or just sitting by the creek. The women in town had said she was sweeping the floor near the hearth. The broom snagged on a loose floorboard. She knelt. It was just one board, the nail having worked itself free. Curiosity, a feeling she had suppressed for weeks, moved her hands. She pulled the board up. Beneath it was a small, dark space, and in it, a book. Her breath caught. It was a journal, bound in leather that was now stiff and warped. She lifted it out. It was heavy for its size. She sat on the floor, the last of the evening light coming through the open door, and opened it. The first page was a name, written in a delicate, looping hand. Sarah Rollins, 1876. Eleanor's hand trembled. This was what he had kept hidden. This was the heart of the house. She turned the pages. It was not a diary of chores. It was a book of feelings. Sarah had written about the loneliness, the wind, the way the sky looked at sunset. She had pressed flowers between the pages, bits of purple verbena and a small, faded yellow cactus blossom, now brittle as paper. Cole brought me this one from the high rocks. Sarah had written, "He said it was the color of my hair." Eleanor's throat tightened. There was a man here she did not know. A man who noticed the color of flowers, who climbed rocks to fetch one. She turned more pages. The writing became more sparse. The entries were shorter. The wind does not stop. I have not seen another woman in 3 weeks. Cole is quiet. The scouting changes him. He sees things. Then, the pages changed. The last few were not writing. They were stains. Near the back, a single page was smeared with a dark, rusted brown. It was stiff. The page stuck to the one beneath it, and clinging to the stain, caught in the fibers of the paper, was a single dried flower, a tiny bluebell. It was blood. Eleanor stared at it, her heart pounding a sick, slow rhythm. This was not a memory. It was a physical thing. This was the moment of the raid. This was the too late the women had whispered about. This was what he had found by the creek. A shadow fell over her. She looked up. Cole was standing in the doorway. His face was not angry, it was white. It was terrifying in its stillness. His eyes were not on her, but on the journal in her hands. He moved. It was fast, a predator's strike. He did not speak. He ripped the journal from her grasp. The brittle pages tore. The dried flowers scattered onto the floor like dust. "No," Eleanor whispered, reaching, but it was too late. He turned to the hearth, where the embers of the cook fire still glowed. He threw the book onto the coals. The dry leather caught instantly. The pages blackened, curling at the edges. The smell of burning paper, of burning history, filled the small cabin. Eleanor stood, horrified. "Cole, do not! It is all you have left of her!" He turned on her, his face a mask of such profound rage that she took an involuntary step back. His hands were clenched into fists at his sides. "You do not touch what is not yours," he whispered, his voice shaking. "You do not touch her. You do not touch my life." He was breathing hard, staring at the fire as it consumed the last of his wife. Eleanor looked at the flames, at the man whose grief was so violent it was destroying the very thing he mourned. She did not back down. She did not run. She had hidden in cellars. She had run from men like him. But this man was not angry at her. He was angry at the world, at God, at himself. She kept her voice low, steady, though the knife in her boot felt suddenly cold against her leg. "You married me," she said softly, her words cutting through the crackle of the fire. "I am here, that book. It was part of this house, and I belong here now. Like it or not." He stared at her, his chest heaving. He looked as if he wanted to strike her. He looked as if he wanted to weep. He looked at her as if she were the one who had pulled the trigger, the one who had stolen his wife. Then, without a word, he turned and stalked out of the cabin, slamming the door hard enough to make the new shutter rattle. Eleanor was left alone with the smell of smoke and the scattered, brittle flowers on the floor. She knelt and picked them up, one by one, her hand trembling far more than his had. That night, she did not sleep. The fire in the hearth died, but the smell of the smoke lingered, thick and acrid. It pulled her back, not to the cabin, but to another time, another darkness. The smell was wrong. It should have been the smell of damp earth, of potatoes and beets stored for winter. But Arthur had locked her in the cellar. It was 2 years ago, but it was now. Arthur. He had been a man of fine words and a handsome face. He had married her for her father's farm, the small patch of green land back east, and when the land was gone, sold for his whiskey and his cards. His fine words had turned hard, and his hands had turned harder. She had tried to leave. She had packed a bag, the same satchel she carried now. He had caught her by the road. He had not just been angry, he had been insulted. She was his property, the land was gone, but she was not. He had dragged her back to the house, his voice a low, terrifying croon. "You think you can leave me, Ellie? You think you belong to anyone but me?" He had thrown her down the cellar stairs. The door had slammed. The heavy bar had fallen. She had screamed, but he had left. He had ridden away, leaving her to die. The sound of his horse's hooves faded. She was alone in the cold dark. She had stayed there for 2 days. The first day, she screamed until her throat was raw. The second day, she sat in the silence, her body aching from the fall, the cold seeping into her bones. She had prepared to die. She had whispered her mother's name. Then, the door had opened. It was not Arthur. It was Mr. Abernathy, their neighbor, come to ask about a stray cow. He had found her, a small, shivering thing huddled in the roots and the damp. Arthur never came back. He had fallen from his horse, drunk, and broken his neck on the road. Eleanor lay on her cot in Cole's cabin and stared at the dark ceiling. She had survived. Cole Rollins' rage was just a noise. It was the quiet, smiling cruelty of a man like Arthur that was truly deadly. Cole was broken. Arthur had been evil. She knew the difference. The memory settled her. It did not weaken her. It firmed her spine. The next day, she rose and went to the kitchen. She took out the flour. She was making bread. As she worked the dough, kneading it, pushing her weight into the task, she began to hum. It was a small, tuneless sound, a hymn she barely remembered, a sound of life. The cabin door opened. Cole stood there, having just come from the well, a bucket in his hand. He froze. The humming was an offense. It was a sound of contentment in a house of mourning. "Stop that," he said. His voice was raw. Eleanor's hands paused in the dough. She looked at him. His face was dark, his eyes shadowed. She saw the man by the fire, the man who had burned his own past. She turned back to the dough and continued to knead, and she continued to hum, just a little louder. He slammed the bucket onto the dry sink, water sloshing over the side. "I said stop it. There is no singing in this house." "I'm humming," she said, not looking up. "It is the same. Stop it." "No." He crossed the small cabin in 2 strides. He stood over her, his shadow covering the table. She could smell the cold morning air on him. "You think you can just come in here," he seethed, "and dig up the ground, and change my house, and make your noises. You think you can replace her?" "I am not replacing anyone," she said, finally looking up at him. Her hands were white with flour. "I am living. It is what people do. Cole, or they die." His face contorted. "You will never be enough." The words hit her, but they did not sting. Not after Arthur. "I will not be her," she agreed. "You do not know how to survive this," he said, gesturing to the window, to the harsh land beyond. "You are weak. You are soft. The West will eat you. You do not know how to survive." She saw the opening. She saw the crack in his wall, the fear beneath the rage. He was not talking about her. He was talking about Sarah. Eleanor wiped her floured hands on her apron. She met his gaze, and her voice was not soft. It was strong. "Then teach me." He stared at her. His mouth opened slightly. He had expected her to cry. He had expected her to fight. He had expected her to cower. He had not expected this simple, impossible request. "Teach me." It was an invitation into his world. It was an admission of her need, but a demand for his strength. It threw him off balance more than any argument could have. He said nothing. He looked at her for a long, stunned moment, his anger deflating, replaced by a baffled confusion. He turned, grabbed his rifle from the wall, and left the cabin, the door swinging shut quietly behind him. That night, the cold was sharp. The stars looked like chips of ice. Eleanor could not sleep. The small cabin felt charged, like the air before a lightning strike. She rose from her cot and pulled her shawl around her shoulders. She stepped outside. He was there. He was sitting on a log near the dark shape of the barn, the starlight glinting off the metal in his hands. He was cleaning his gun. His rifle was laid across his knees, a cleaning rod and oily rags beside him. He was meticulous. He worked the rod down the barrel, his movements economical, practiced. It was a ritual. Eleanor walked slowly, the dirt muffling her steps. She stopped a few feet away from him. He did not look up, but his hands paused. He knew she was there. She watched him for a long minute. He was cleaning the gun that had been too late, the gun that had failed him. She broke the silence, her voice soft, carrying on the cold air. Was she scared? He froze. His head was bent, his hat shadowing his face. He did not move. He did not breathe. She was not asking about the raid. She was asking about Sarah. In the moment of her death, he did not answer, but she saw his hand, the one holding the rifle. It began to shake, a small, violent tremor that ran from his knuckles up his arm. The tough ex-scout, the hard cattleman. His hand shook so badly he had to set the rifle down on the log. He still did not look at her. He just stared at his own trembling hand as if it belonged to someone else. Eleanor did not press him. She did not ask again. She did not offer words of comfort. There were no words for this. She just walked the last few feet and sat down on the log beside him. She did not sit close enough to touch. She just sat. She looked up at the stars, and he looked at his hands. They sat in the vast, cold, shared silence for nearly an hour. Finally, he stood, picked up his rifle and his rags, and walked away. He did not go to the barn. Eleanor waited until she heard the sound of the cabin door opening. She waited until she heard it close. She followed a few minutes later. She slipped back inside, her eyes adjusting to the dark. He was not on the floor. He was not in the chair. Cole Rollins was on his cot, his back to the room, a blanket pulled up to his shoulders. He had not slept in the barn. He arrived on a Tuesday, a day of suffocating windless heat. Eleanor saw him first. She was outside, turning the hard soil of her fledgling garden, when a dark speck appeared on the eastern horizon. It resolved itself slowly into a man on a mule, moving with a weary, plodding rhythm. He was a traveling preacher. She knew the type, thin, dusty, with a worn black coat and eyes that held either profound peace or a desperate, hungry fervor. This man, as he drew closer, seemed to possess only the weariness. He stopped his mule at the edge of the yard, near her brown patch of earth. He removed his hat, revealing a pale scalp damp with sweat. "Good day, ma'am," he said, his voice raspy. "Reverend Gideon Josiah. I am passing through, heading for the settlement at Redemption. May I trouble you for a drink from your well?" "We have no well," Eleanor said, wiping her hands on her apron. "The creek is a ways south, but I have water in the cabin." She went inside, dipped a cup into the bucket, and brought it out. The preacher drank it in 3 long, noisy swallows. He handed the cup back, his eyes surveying the homestead. He saw the isolation, the rough-hewn wood of the cabin, the dilapidated barn. "A hard land, ma'am," he said, his gaze settling on her. "A hard land for a new beginning. You are the new Mrs. Rollins?" Eleanor nodded, her throat tightening. "I passed through here, must be 3 winters ago now," the preacher said, his voice softening. "I knew his first wife, Sarah, a lovely, gentle soul. It was a tragedy, a terrible tragedy." He looked at the cabin. "I'm glad to see Mr. Rollins has found solace. It is not good for man to be alone." From the barn, a shadow detached itself. Cole had been shoeing his horse. He walked toward them, wiping his hands on a filthy rag. He did not look at the preacher. He looked at Eleanor. "What does he want?" Cole's voice was flat. "Mr. Rollins," the preacher said, nodding, undeterred by the cold welcome. "A blessing on you. I was just telling your new wife. It is a joy to see life return to this house. I had heard you had taken a new bride. I would be honored, sir, if you would allow me to bless this house and your remarriage. A few words from the good book, to sanctify this union in the eyes of God." Cole stopped. He was perhaps 5 feet from the preacher. He looked at the man's hopeful, tired face. He looked at the worn Bible tucked into his saddlebag. Then, Cole began to laugh. It was not a sound of humor. It was a cold, sharp, ugly sound, like stones breaking. It was a laugh that held no joy, only a deep and bottomless bitterness. It went on for too long, echoing in the hot, still air. The preacher's smile faltered, then vanished. "Sanctify!" Cole finally spat the word. "You think God bothers with this place? Preacher? You think he listens? He was not here 2 winters ago. He is not here now." He took a step closer, his height forcing the preacher to crane his neck back. "You want to say words? Say them. It is all for show. It is just wind. It does not mean anything. It does not change anything. It does not bring anyone back. And it does not make this." He gestured toward Eleanor, a flick of his hand, as if dismissing her, real. "Sir," the preacher stammered, "faith is our shield against—" "Get off my land," Cole said. It was not a shout. It was a low, final command. The preacher looked at Eleanor, his face full of pity. "Ma'am, you should go," Eleanor said, her voice quiet. She could not meet his eyes. The preacher, shaken, put his hat back on his head. He tugged the mule's rein. "God be with you, child," he murmured, and turned his animal back toward the dusty track. Eleanor and Cole stood in the yard, not looking at each other, until the preacher was once again a small, dark speck. Eleanor turned to go back inside. "He is right about one thing," Cole said to her back. "It is a hard land." She stopped at the door. "Then I will be hard with it." That night, the house felt smaller, the silence thicker. Cole lay on his cot, his face to the wall. Eleanor lay on hers, separated by the dark room. But his words hung in the air between them. "It does not make this real." She had not cried, not in front of the preacher, not in front of Cole. She had not let herself cry since that first night in the cellar, when she thought Arthur had left her to die. Crying was a weakness, a waste of water and salt. But in the deep, moonless dark of the cabin, with the wind picking up outside, the loneliness overwhelmed her. It was not just Cole. It was the memory of the preacher's pity, the memory of the townswomen's whispers, the memory of Arthur's hand. She turned her face into the thin, straw-stuffed pillow and let the tears come. She made no sound. It was a silent, shaking grief, a quiet collapse she had held back for months. She wept for the woman she had been, for the child she had whispered of, Daniel, the one she had lost before he was ever known. She wept for this empty, wasted marriage. On the other side of the room, Cole was not asleep. He heard it. It was not a loud sobbing. It was the sound of a small animal in a trap, a hitched breath, a long, shuddering sigh, a desperate attempt to be silent. He clenched his jaw. He closed his eyes, pulling his own rough blanket tighter. Let her cry. Not my concern. His rules: cook, clean, stay in the kitchen. He had never said anything about crying. The sound continued. It was infuriating. It was a pinprick of weakness, a sound of softness in his hard, iron world. It reminded him of Sarah. Sarah had cried, near the end, when the loneliness got too bad. He had been useless then, too. He sat up, scrubbing his face with his hands. He wanted to yell at her. Be quiet. Stop that sound. But he did not. He stood, his bare feet silent on the cold floorboards. He looked at her small, huddled shape on the cot. She was just a lump in the darkness. He felt a sudden, unwelcome surge of something. It was not pity. He did not have pity. It was an irritation, an annoyance that this thin, breakable thing had been sent to him, to disturb his grief. He turned and went to the pegs by the door. His heavy winter coat hung there. Beneath it, folded on a chest, was an old blanket. It was a horse blanket, thick wool, rough as bark. It smelled of hay and leather in the barn. It was the one he used when he slept out there. He picked it up. It was heavy. He walked to her cot. She had gone still, sensing him. She was holding her breath. He did not speak. He did not touch her. He just opened the blanket and let it fall over her. It covered her completely. Then he turned, walked back to his own cot, and lay down, his back to her. Eleanor lay frozen beneath the sudden weight. The blanket was heavy and surprisingly warm. It smelled of him, of his horse, of clean sweat and the outdoors. It was a profoundly male smell, but it was not the sour whiskey smell of Arthur. It was the smell of work. She did not mention it in the morning. He did not look at her. But when she rose, she folded the rough blanket and placed it at the foot of her own bed. She kept it. The fragile truce held for another week. Then, the food began to run low. The beans were gone. The flour sack was a limp, dusty rag. Cole's traps had been empty for 3 days straight, and the rabbit he had shot was a distant memory. Hunger made the air in the cabin sharp. Cole stood by the door at dawn, his rifle in hand. "I am riding north, to the high plateau," he said. "There might be deer. I will be back by tomorrow night, maybe 2 days." He looked at her, his gaze impersonal. "Bar the door. Do not go out. Do not light a fire they can see from a distance." He turned to leave. "Cole," she said. He stopped. "What if someone comes?" He looked at her. He saw her fear, the memory of the preacher, the isolation. He hesitated. His jaw worked. He walked to the corner, to a small box he kept under his own cot. He reached inside and pulled something out. He walked back and held it out to her. It was a revolver. It was not his own. The fine Colt he wore on his hip when he rode out. This one was old, the metal pitted with rust, the wooden grip dark and smooth. "It is a Navy revolver," he said, his voice clipped, impatient. "It is loaded. 5 shots. You pull the hammer back." He demonstrated, his thumb pulling the hammer back with a loud, ominous click. "And you pull the trigger. Point it at what you mean to hit. It will kick." He pressed it into her hand. It was heavy, so heavy, cold, balanced all wrong. It felt alien, a piece of his world she had never been meant to touch. "Just in case," he said. He left. She stood in the doorway, the rusted revolver heavy in her hand, and watched him ride away until he was gone. She put the gun on the kitchen shelf, high, where she would not have to look at it. The day passed in a thick, anxious silence. The quiet of the cabin was absolute. Every gust of wind was a footstep. Every creak of the wood was a door opening. She did not go outside, not even to her garden. She sat at the table, her hands clenched in her lap, and waited. The next morning, he came. She heard the horse first. A single horse, moving slow, not Cole's hard, driving pace. She ran to the window. It was not Cole. It was a man she had never seen, but she knew him instantly. He was not a cowboy. He wore a dark, Eastern-style suit, rumpled and dusty, but it was a suit nonetheless. He had a narrow face and a smile that did not touch his cold, pale eyes. He dismounted, tied his horse to the fence, and walked to her door. He did not knock. He just stood there, smiling, as if he knew she was watching. Eleanor's blood turned to ice. She ran to the kitchen, her hands shaking. She grabbed the revolver. It felt slick and heavy. She went to the door, her heart hammering so hard it hurt her chest. She stood just inside, the gun hidden in the folds of her skirt. "Go away," she called, her voice trembling. "Now, is that any way to greet an old friend?" The man's voice was smooth, oiled. "I have come a very long way to see you. Anna. Anna." The name hit her like a blow. No one had called her that in 2 years, not since she had fled her old life. Anna, her real name, the name Arthur had used. "I do not know any Anna," she said, her voice stronger. "My name is Eleanor Rawlins. This is my husband's land. You need to leave." The man laughed, a soft, dry chuckle. "Anna, Anna, you can change your name, but you cannot change who you are. You cannot change what you did." He knew. He knew about Arthur. He knew about the farm. "Who are you?" she demanded. "Just a man from home," he said. He took a step closer to the door. "A friend of Arthur's. He owed me a great deal of money, and when he died, his property, well, it seems his widow vanished, along with anything of value." "He left me nothing," she hissed. "He left me to die in a cellar." "Ah, yes, the cellar. A good story. makes you sound like the victim. But some folks back home, they have a different story. Some say the wife was not so innocent. Some say she planned it all. Some say—" She made sure Arthur did not come back. "That is a lie." "Is it?" He smiled again. "I am just here to collect what is owed. Arthur's debt is your debt. A few $100s should clear it. I have no money. I think you do. Or your new husband does. This is a fine piece of land. He has cattle. A man like that would pay to keep his new wife's reputation clean. Would he not?" This was it. The past had found her. It had crossed the country and was standing on her doorstep. "Get away from this house," Eleanor said. She raised the gun. Her hand trembled violently. The long, rusted barrel shook. The man's smile widened. He looked at the trembling gun, and he looked at her white, terrified face. He was not afraid. He will not want you when he knows the truth. The man, Silas, as she now remembered him, Silas Croft, a leech who had always hung around Arthur, smirked. A woman who ran, a woman whose husband died, conveniently, a woman who lies about her own name. He put his hand on the door. "He will throw you out. A man like that, a hard man, he will throw you out, Anna, and then you will have nothing except me." He pushed the door. Eleanor screamed, "No!" and pulled the trigger. The explosion was deafening in the small space. The gun kicked back, harder than she could have imagined, slamming her wrist against the doorframe. The bullet went wide, splintering the wood far to the man's left, but the sound, the violence of it, made him jump back. His smile was gone. His face was pale. "You are crazy," he breathed. "I will shoot you," Eleanor said, her voice a raw whisper. She was shaking all over, but she held the gun with both hands now, pointing it at his chest. "I will shoot you. I will not go back. Get out." Silas looked at her, at the smoking gun, at the wildness in her eyes. He was a coward, like all bullies. He raised his hands. All right, Anna, you win, for now." He backed away slowly, untied his horse, and mounted. He looked down at her one last time. "He will find out. You cannot hide what you are." He kicked his horse and rode away, fast, disappearing back into the heat. Eleanor stood there until he was gone. Then she dropped the gun, which clattered to the floor. She slid down the wall, her legs giving out, and put her face in her hands, her body racked with silent, terrified sobs. Cole returned the next evening. He was exhausted, but there was a large buck strapped to the back of his horse. He did not look triumphant, just tired. Eleanor met him in the yard. She had scrubbed the floor. She had hidden the gun back in the box under his cot. She had practiced her words. He grunted as he untied the deer, hauling it onto his shoulder. "Any trouble?" he asked, his voice rough. She looked at his face, at the lines of exhaustion and grief etched around his eyes. She saw the man who had burned his wife's journal, the man who had laughed at the preacher. She could not tell him. She could not add her shame to his anger. He would, she knew with a sickening certainty, do exactly what Silas had said. He would throw her out. She lied. "No," she said, her voice clear. "It was quiet. A peddler came by yesterday, selling thread and notions. I told him we did not need anything. I sent him off." Cole nodded, seeming to accept it. "Good." He hauled the deer to the smokehouse. She went inside to sharpen the knives. The lie sat in her stomach, heavy and cold as the rusted revolver. That night, the world broke. A storm blew in, the same kind of vicious, cold wind that had destroyed the chicken coop. It howled, rattling the cabin. Eleanor and Cole ate the fresh venison in silence, the sound of the wind filling the space between them. Around midnight, they were woken by a new sound, a low, panicked bellowing. The cattle. Cole was out of his cot in an instant, pulling on his boots. The herd, the fence. So he grabbed his rifle and a lantern, and burst out into the storm. Eleanor watched him go. She heard the wind, the rain turning to ice, the sound of the terrified animals. She thought of her rules. Stay in the kitchen. She thought of what she had said. Then teach me. She pulled on her own boots, grabbed the heavy blanket from her cot, and ran out after him. The northern pasture was chaos. The wind had toppled a dead cottonwood, and it had crashed through the fence. The cattle, maddened by the storm, were pushing through the gap, scattering into the darkness. Cole was a silhouette in the lantern light, fighting to turn them, his voice a raw shout against the wind. "Get back," he yelled when he saw her. "Go back to the house! You need help!" she shouted back, pulling the blanket tight around her head. "I need you out of the way." But she did not go. She saw what he was doing. He was trying to build a temporary barrier to hold the rest of the herd back while he dealt with the main break. He had a hammer and rope. She ran to the broken section. The wood was splintered, sharp. The wind tore at her, nearly knocking her from her feet. "Hold the lantern," he bellowed, thrusting it at her. She held it high, her arm aching, the light swinging wildly in the gale. Cole worked with a desperate, furious energy. He righted a post, using his whole body to wedge it back into the muddy earth. He wrapped rope around it, his hands moving with practiced speed. "Hold this," he yelled, pointing to a loose rail. She dropped the lantern, letting it rest in the mud, and grabbed the heavy, splintered rail. The wood was wet and sharp. She tried to hold it in place while he hammered. "Higher! Push! Damn it!" he roared. She shoved, using all her weight. A sharp edge of the wood bit deep into her palm. She cried out, a sharp gasp lost in the wind. "What? What now?" he yelled, impatient. "My hand," she gasped, pulling it back. He grabbed her wrist, pulling her into the small circle of lantern light. He looked down. Blood, dark in the yellow light, was welling from a deep, ragged cut across her palm. It dripped onto the mud. He swore, a low, rough sound. He looked at the cut, then at her face, pale and streaked with rain and dirt. He looked at the cattle, still pressing against the makeshift line. He said nothing. He let go of her wrist, turned, and yanked at his own shirt, tearing a long strip from the hem. The fabric was rough, but it was warm from his body. He took her hand again. His grip was firm, impersonal, but his touch, as he wrapped the cloth around her palm, was surprisingly gentle. He folded the cloth into a thick pad, placed it over the cut, and then wound the rest of the strip tightly around her hand, his calloused, rough fingers brushing her skin. He tied it off, a quick, secure knot. His head was bent to the task. The lantern light lit his face from below, carving shadows under his brows. They were close, so close she could feel the heat coming off him, see the flecks of ice in his beard. The wind roared around them, but in this small circle of light, there was only the sound of their breathing and the drip of the rain. He finished the knot. He did not let go. His thumb rested for a second on her pulse point, his grip still firm on her wrist. He looked up. His eyes met hers. For the first time, he was not looking at her as cargo, as a burden, as a replacement. He was looking at her. He saw her, shivering, bleeding, but still there, still in the storm with him. His gaze dropped to her mouth. "You should not be here," he murmured, his voice so low she barely heard it over the wind. It was not an order. It was a statement, a confession. "But I am," she whispered back. He leaned in. His eyes were dark, full of a storm that matched the one outside. He was going to kiss her. Her heart stopped. She did not breathe. She did not pull away. His face was an inch from hers. She could feel his breath. He touched her hair. It was a gesture of such aching, unexpected tenderness that her eyes filled with tears. His rough fingers, stained with mud and her blood, just brushed a wet strand back from her temple. He closed his eyes. A spasm of pain crossed his face. He pulled back, as if she had burned him. "Sarah," he whispered. The name was a blade. It cut deeper than the wood. He was not seeing her. He was seeing his wife. He was seeing a ghost. He let go of her hand, shoving it back at her. He turned away, grabbing the hammer. "Go back to the cabin," he said. His voice was dead. "Cole, go!" He swung the hammer, bringing it down on the post with a violent, final crack. He did not look at her again. Eleanor stood for a moment, her newly bandaged hand throbbing, a cold deeper than the ice sinking into her chest. She turned and walked away from him, back through the mud, leaving him alone in the storm, rebuilding his broken fence. She did not go back to the cabin. She stopped in the middle of the dark pasture, far from the house, far from him. She hugged herself, her good hand clutching the arm with the bandaged one. The moonlight broke through the clouds, lighting the ruined land in a stark, silver light. The tears came, hot and immediate. They mingled with the rain and the dirt on her face. She was not just crying for the kiss that did not happen. She was crying because she was a lie, and he was a ghost, and they were trapped together in a place where nothing, not even the fences, could hold. The news came from town, carried on the same dry wind that moved the tumbleweeds. It was a poison, seeping into the air. Eleanor had walked to Redemption for supplies, her first trip in a week. The town felt different. The usual lethargy was gone, replaced by a tight, brittle fear. Men stood in tight knots by the saloon, their hands near their guns, not talking, just watching the street. The women in the general store, normally a source of gossip, spoke in low, terrified whispers. It was the Miller farm. Eleanor heard Mrs. Gable, the blacksmith's wife, say to the proprietor, her voice was thin, "Just 2 nights ago, they took everything, the horses, the food, everything." "And Mr. Miller?" Mr. Hemlock asked, weighing out beans. "Broken. They found him tied up in the barn, but his wife..." Mrs. Gable stopped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Eleanor, then looked away, as if her presence was an offense. "They say," another woman whispered, leaning in, "they say she fought back. They found her by the hearth. It was not a clean death. A woman killed. In her own home. By the hearth." Eleanor felt the blood drain from her face. The hearth, the kitchen, the designated safe place. She finished her purchases, her hands stiff, the small bag of flour feeling impossibly heavy. She walked the 2 miles back to the homestead, but she was not just walking. She was scanning the horizon. Every distant rock formation looked like a man on a horse. The wind sounded like a low whistle. The lies she had told Cole about the peddler, about Silas Croft, felt hot and stupid in her throat. The world was full of men who took what they wanted. Cole was in the yard when she returned. He was pulling the last of the dead corn stalks from her garden. He saw her face. "What is it?" "The Miller farm. It was raided. Outlaws. They killed Mrs. Miller." Cole did not react. Not at first. He just stood very still, his hand clenched around the dry stalk. He looked north, toward the Miller claim. Then he looked at the cabin. His face, which she had learned to read in its small degrees of coldness, became a sheet of iron. He dropped the stalk. "Go inside," he said. "Cole, go inside, and bar the door." He did not wait for her. He went to the barn, and she heard the sound of a heavy chest being dragged. When he came out, he was carrying a box of tools and a stack of thick planks she had not seen before. For the rest of the day, he worked. The sound of his hammer was the only sound. It was a steady, angry rhythm. Bang, bang, bang. He was boarding up the windows. He did not board up the kitchen window entirely, but he nailed thick crossbeams over it, leaving only small squares for light to pass through. He reinforced the front door, adding a new, thick wooden bar to the inside. He took down his rifles, all 3 of them, and laid them on the table. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, watching him. He was a machine. He was the ex-Union scout. This was a language he knew. War, fortification. He oiled each gun, his hands moving with a speed and certainty she had never seen. He was not the grieving husband now. He was a soldier. He lined cartridges up on the table, dozens of them, little brass soldiers glinting in the dim light. He finished his work as the sun began to set, casting long, red shadows through the newly barred windows. The cabin felt like a tomb. It felt like a trap. He looked at her, She was sitting at the table, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. "Tomorrow, at first light," he said, his voice flat. "You will ride to town. You will stay at the boarding house. You will wait there." Eleanor looked up. "Wait for what? Until I come for you? Or until it is safe?" "You mean until they come here?" He did not deny it. "They hit the Miller place. They are moving south. They will hit us next. We are isolated. It is what they look for." "And what will you do?" she asked. "I will be here." "Alone. I am better alone." His eyes were cold. "I do not need to be worrying about you." A chill that had nothing to do with the evening air settled over her. He was sending her away. Just like he had tried to do during the storm. He was sending her away to be safe, but it felt like he was casting her off. He was protecting his fight, his grief, his land. She was not part of it. "No," she said. His head snapped up. "What did you say?" "I said no. I am not going to town. I am not running." He took a step toward her. "This is not a discussion. This is not a choice. You are a woman. You saw what they did to Martha Miller. You will be in the way. You will get yourself killed." "And you will not," she retorted. Standing, the fear was still there, a cold knot in her stomach. But the lie about Silas was there too, and the memory of the cellar. She had run from Arthur, and he had caught her. She had lied to Cole, and now the threat was real. Running was not an answer. "I will not run again," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "I will not hide in town and wait for someone to tell me I am safe. I will not be locked away." "Locked away?" he roared, his control finally breaking. He swept his arm across the table, scattering the cartridges. They rolled and bounced. A sharp, metallic rain on the floor. "I am trying to save your life. You do not know what these men are. You do not know what they do. You are not strong enough for this." The words hit her, the same words he had used before. Weak, soft. This time, something in her broke. All the fear, all the shame, all the anger at being called a ghost, a replacement, a burden. It all came out in one hot rush. "And you were?" she snapped back, her voice a raw blade. He froze. "What? Were you strong enough?" she demanded, stepping toward him, jabbing her finger at his chest. "After she died. Were you strong enough when you let this place fall to ruin? When you slept in the barn? When you burned her book? Were you strong enough when you pushed me away in the pasture because you saw her ghost? You are no stronger than I am. Cole Rollins. You are just better at hiding in your own pain." It was a terrible blow. She saw it land. She saw the color drain from his face, saw the muscle in his jaw leap. His eyes, those cold winter sky eyes, looked as if she had struck him. He looked broken. He said nothing. He stared at her for a long, terrible moment, his breath coming hard. Then he turned. He picked up one of the rifles, his main Winchester, and he walked out the door, slamming it so hard the new bar rattled in its bracket. Eleanor was left alone in the fortified, suffocating darkness. She sank onto the chair, her body trembling from the confrontation. She had said the truth, the one thing that lived between them, the name of his wife. She had used it as a weapon, and it had cut them both. She did not know how long she sat there. The cabin grew cold. The moon rose, sending thin, white bars of light through the boarded-up windows. He did not come back. She knew where he was. He was at the creek. He was at her grave. Finally. Eleanor stood up. She felt a cold resolve. He was right about one thing. She was not strong enough. Not as she was. She had to be. She lit a single candle. She walked to the corner of the room, to the small, unpainted chest where Sarah's things were kept. The one he had never opened. The one he had probably forgotten. She knelt and opened the lid. The smell of lavender and dust rose up. A dress, blue calico, folded neatly. A pair of small, worn shoes. A bonnet. Eleanor ignored them. Her hands searched deeper, beneath the soft things. Her fingers brushed leather. She pulled it out. It was a gun belt. It was smaller than Cole's, made for a woman's waist. The leather was supple, well oiled. In the holster was a revolver, a smaller Colt, clean and cared for. Beside it was a box of cartridges, and tucked in the bottom, a pair of worn leather boots, just her size. She laid them on the floor. She did not feel like she was robbing a grave. She felt like she was accepting an inheritance. This was what it took. Sarah had known. She was sitting on the floor, the candlelight glinting off the revolver. When Cole returned, he stopped dead in the doorway. He saw the open chest. He saw his dead wife's things on the floor. He saw Eleanor, her face pale in the low light, cleaning the small revolver with one of his own rags. His voice was a raw, choked whisper. "What are you doing?" Eleanor did not look up. She finished loading the last chamber, clicked the cylinder shut, and laid the gun in the holster. "He said I was not strong enough," she said, her voice quiet. He was right. She looked up at him. Her eyes were dry. "I will not be Martha Miller. I will not be found by my own hearth. I will not be run out of my own home by a man I have never met, and I will not hide in a cellar again." She picked up the gun belt. It was heavy. "If I die," she said, standing, "I will die trying." Cole stared at her. He saw the woman who had fixed his coop in the storm, the woman who had mended his fence, bleeding in the mud, the woman who had just slashed him to the bone with the truth. And now he saw this, a woman he did not know at all. He did not yell. He did not try to take the gun. He just nodded, a single, sharp dip of his chin. He walked to his cot, laid his rifle beside it, and sat down, his back to her. He did not sleep. Neither did she. Eleanor sat in the kitchen, Sarah's revolver on her lap, and waited for the dawn. They did not have to wait long. The sound came just as the sky was turning a sick, pale gray. It was not a shout. It was the sound of horses. Too many horses, moving too fast. Cole was on his feet instantly. He was at the front door, his rifle in his hand. "They are here," he said, his voice calm. He was in his element. Eleanor ran to the kitchen, her heart slamming against her ribs. She looked through the small, barred square of the window. She could see them. 4 riders. They had stopped at the edge of the property, just out of rifle range, surveying the house. "They see the boards," Cole said, his voice low. "Coming from the main room. They know we are waiting." "What do we do?" she whispered, her hands shaking so much she could barely hold the revolver. "You stay there, in the kitchen. It is the most fortified room. Do not come out. No matter what you hear, do you understand? Yes. Shoot at anything that tries to come through that back door. Do not wait. Just shoot." The first rifle shot cracked from outside. The bullet slammed into the front door, a heavy thud that shook the cabin. "Get down," Cole yelled. Eleanor dropped to the floor, her back against the pantry door. The world exploded. Gunfire erupted from all sides. They were circling the house. Bullets tore through the thinner parts of the walls, splintering wood, sending dust and slivers flying. The sound was deafening, a constant, rolling thunder. "Ella Jit on the floor." Anna pressed her hands over her ears. She was terrified. She was back in the cellar. No, I am not in the cellar." She forced herself to crawl to the small, barred window. She peered out. One of the men was dismounting, running toward the barn, carrying a torch. "The barn!" she screamed. "He is going to fire the barn!" Cole's rifle cracked from the front room. A man screamed, a high, thin sound. "One down," Cole yelled. But the man with the torch was already at the barn. He tossed it onto the dry hay piled by the door. The flame caught instantly, whooshing up in a sheet of orange. "He did it!" Eleanor cried, watching the flames. "They're animals. His horse. Damn them!" Cole's voice was full of rage. He fired again. Another bullet hit the house. Then she heard it, a new sound, right outside her door. Scraping. Someone was at the kitchen door, trying to pry it open. Eleanor's blood ran cold. She scrambled backward, dragging herself across the floor until her back hit the pantry. She raised the revolver with both hands. The barrel shook. The scraping stopped. A heavy boot kicked the door. The wood groaned. "Cole!" she screamed. "Hold them!" he yelled back. She heard his rifle fire again. Another kick. The door was splintering. A hand, raw and dirty, reached through a new crack. Fumbling for the inside latch, Eleanor aimed at the door. She closed her eyes and pulled the trigger. The gun jumped in her hands. The explosion filled the small kitchen. A sharp, wet scream came from the other side of the door. The hand vanished. She heard a heavy thud as a body slumped against the wood. Silence. She had done it. She had shot him. Oh God, she was going to be sick. "Eleanor," Cole's voice. It sounded wrong, strained. "I got him! I think I got him!" she yelled, her voice a high-pitched sob. "Good, good girl." Another shot from his rifle. "There is one left." "He is running for the horses." She heard Cole move. He unbarred the front door. "Cole, no! Stay inside! He is getting away." The front door opened. Cole's rifle fired twice. Fast. A new sound. A different gun. A pistol. From outside. And then, a sound that would haunt Eleanor for the rest of her life. A heavy, wet thwack, followed by Cole's sharp, grunting cry of pain. "Cole!" She scrambled to her feet. She ran from the kitchen into the main room. The front door was wide open. The barn was a roaring inferno, casting a hellish red light into the cabin. Cole was on his knees, just inside the doorway. He was clutching his side. A dark, spreading stain was covering his shirt. "Cole!" she whispered, running to him. He looked up. His eyes were wide, unfocused. He did not seem to see her. "Sarah," he breathed. He was looking past her, into the smoke. "Cole, it is me. It is Eleanor." She tried to grab his arm. He pushed her away, his strength surprising. "Sarah, get the rifle. They are at the creek. I told you to stay. I told you." He was bleeding. He was delirious with the pain and the blood loss. "They are here, Sarah," he moaned, his body slumping. He was trying to lift his rifle, but he could not. "I was too late. I am sorry. I am so sorry." He was not in the cabin. He was back at the creek. 2 winters ago. He was watching his wife die all over again. Eleanor's heart shattered. He was dying, and he was dying with her. "No," Eleanor said, her voice fierce. She grabbed his face, forcing him to look at her. His blood was hot and sticky on her hands. "Cole, look at me. She is gone. Sarah is gone." His eyes flickered. He saw her. "I am here," Eleanor said, her tears starting, hot and fast. "I am Eleanor. I am here, and I am real." She knelt beside him as he swayed, pressing her own hand, the one he had bandaged, hard against the wound in his side. "I am real," she whispered again, a desperate plea. His eyes lost their focus. His head fell forward. She caught him. She held his weight, easing him down to the floor. His blood was everywhere. She bent over him, her tears falling into his hair. She kissed his forehead, a frantic, desperate press of her lips against his skin. She cried into his hair, holding him, the smoke from the burning barn washing over them. "Do not leave me," she sobbed. But he was already gone. His body went limp. He was unconscious. The sun rose on a field of blood. The light, when it came, was cruel. It showed the smoking ruin of the barn, the pockmarked walls of the cabin, the dark stains on the floor. Outside, 3 bodies lay twisted on the ground, the one Cole had shot, the one who had fled, and the one by her kitchen door. She had been sitting by Cole, holding pressure on his wound. For hours. He was breathing. It was shallow, but it was there. She had dragged him to his cot. She had ripped his shirt open. The bullet had gone in his side, low. She did not know if it had gone through. She did not know how to fix it. She only knew how to stop the bleeding. She packed the wound with clean strips of cloth, the last of her good linen, and bound his torso tightly. He survived. He was alive, lost in a deep, fevered sleep. The sun was high. The bodies were still outside. Eleanor went to the door. She looked at the man she had shot. He was young, his face frozen in a grimace of surprise. She threw up, a quick, violent spasm. In the yard. Then, she wiped her mouth and got the spade. She would not bury them near the house. She would not bury them near Sarah's grave. She dragged them, one by one. It was a terrible, grotesque labor. She pulled them by their boots, her muscles screaming, down to the shallow creek, a quarter-mile south, the one he had warned her about, the Outlaw Pass. She dug. The ground was hard, but not as hard as her heart had become. She dug one wide, shallow grave. She did not pray. She did not say words. She just rolled them in and covered them with dirt and rocks. It took her all afternoon. Their horses were gone. Their coats. She piled them up. She found a match in the cabin and set them on fire. The smell of burning wool was acrid. She would not have them recognized. She would not have more men come looking. This was over. As the sun set, she returned to the cabin. She washed the blood from her hands, from the floor. She sat down in the chair beside Cole's bed. He was still breathing. She was exhausted. Her body ached. Her hands were raw. She was a woman who had lied, who had killed, who had buried men. She reached into her apron pocket. She had gone back. After the fire in the hearth, after he had stormed out, she had salvaged one small, curled, blackened piece of Sarah's journal. The page with the blood stain and the tiny, pressed bluebell. She held it in her hand. She sat in the quiet, listening to the man breathe, and clutched the last remnant of the woman he loved. Her fingers, stained with dirt and gunpowder and blood, trembled. He woke in fragments. The world was a dull, throbbing pain in his side, a thick, dry heat in his mouth, and a profound, confusing grayness. He was not on the floor. He was in his cot. The light in the cabin was wrong. It was soft, filtered. His first thought was a jagged panic. He tried to move, but a fire seared his ribs, and a groan tore from his chest. "Be still," a voice said. Soft. He blinked, his vision swimming. A shape resolved itself by his bed. It was her, Eleanor. She was holding a damp cloth. His mind was fog. It grasped for the last solid thing it remembered. The smoke, the gunfire, the face in the doorway. "Where is she?" he rasped, his voice a dry croak. His eyes searched the cabin, frantic, looking for the ghost he had seen, the one he had failed. "Sarah, where?" The woman beside him did not flinch. She placed the cool, damp cloth on his forehead. Her touch was firm. "She is gone, Cole," Eleanor said, her voice quiet but absolute. "I am here. You are not alone." The words, so simple, so final, broke through the fevered fog. "She is gone. I am here." He was not at the creek. He was in the cabin. The battle was over. And Sarah was still gone. He had called for her. He had seen her. And this woman, this stranger, had held him. It was too much. The truth of it. The years of holding his grief in a tight, iron-hard knot in his chest. The violence he had wrapped around it. It all gave way. He turned his head toward the wall, away from her. A sound escaped him. A low, wretched sound he did not recognize as his own. He wept. He did not weep for the pain in his side. He wept for the smoking ruin of his barn, for the horse he had lost, for the long, wasted years he had spent talking to dirt. He wept for the wife he could not save, and for the fact that, in his delirium, he had called out her name to the woman who had just saved his life. He wept for everything he had lost, and for the terrifying, unwelcome relief that he was still alive. Eleanor did not speak. She did not try to comfort him. She just sat in the chair, a silent presence, and let him break. She let him be the weak one. When the silent, shaking sobs finally subsided, she left the room. She returned a moment later, not with words, but with a small bowl. "Drink this," she said. It was broth, thin, but hot, and it smelled of the venison he had shot. It tasted of salt and life. He was too weak to lift his head. She slid a hand behind his neck, her palm calloused but gentle, and lifted him just enough to drink. He drank. He was so empty. The days that followed were a new kind of silence. It was not the cold, angry silence of their first weeks. It was a quiet, working truce. His life was in her hands. She measured it in spoonfuls of broth and clean bandages. Every morning, she would come to his cot with a bowl of hot water. "You have to turn," she would say, and he would grit his teeth, hissing in pain as he rolled, letting her unwrap the crude bandage. The wound was raw, angry. She would clean it, her touch surprisingly professional, her face a mask of concentration. She never winced at the sight of it. She had seen worse. He knew it, instinctively. She would apply a salve she had made from herbs and lard, and bind him again, her hands moving with a swift, practical grace. Their conversations were small, fragments. "The cattle?" he asked one afternoon, his voice still weak. "They scattered. I found 3. They are in the south pasture. The fence is mended." He stared at her. She had mended the fence, alone. "The bodies?" "Buried." Her voice was flat. "Down by the creek. I burned their coats." He closed his eyes. She had handled it. All of it. The killing, the burying. He had bled on the floor, and she had cleaned up the world. He watched her move. She had patched the bullet holes in the walls with mud and straw. She had scrubbed the blood from the floorboards. She had taken Sarah's revolver, cleaned it, and put it away. She did not wear it, but he knew where it was. She had dragged the ruin of the burned-out barn away from the house, piece by piece, creating a neat stack of charred lumber. One evening, he was strong enough to sit up, his back against the wall. The fever had broken. She sat at the table, mending one of his shirts, the one the outlaws had torn. The light from the single candle cast a warm glow on her face. "You saved my life," he said. She did not look up from her sewing. "We saved each other." "No," he needed to say it. "I ran out. I was a fool. I got shot. You held the kitchen. You shot that man." "I shot the door," she whispered, her hands pausing. "I do not know if I hit him, or if he was just in the way. It does not matter. You did it." A long silence settled. She put the shirt down. "You called her name," she said, her voice soft, holding no accusation. He flinched. "I know. You thought I was her." He looked at his hands, resting on the blanket. "When I am in pain, or when the dark gets too bad, I am always back there, at the creek." She waited. She knew he needed to tell her. She had buried his dead. Now he would show her the ghosts. "It was not like they say in town," he began, his voice rough. "It was not a big raid. It was just 4 of them. Stragglers. They wanted whiskey and horses. Sarah, she was at the creek, gathering mint. I told her it was not safe. I told her to stay in the house." He paused, swallowing, the memory thick in his throat. "I was in the barn. I heard her scream. Just once. I grabbed my rifle. I ran. I was fast. I was a scout. I was supposed to be fast. I got to the tree line. I saw them. 2 of them they were on her. The other 2 were laughing. I shot the first 2. From the trees. They never even saw me. They just fell. The other 2, they ran. Got on their horses and ran." He stopped, his breathing shallow. I ran to her. She was alive, but she was broken. They had hurt her badly, and she was shot. One of them. He had shot her when she screamed." "I killed 2 men," he whispered, looking at Eleanor, his eyes hollow. "I killed them clean, but I was too late. I knelt by her. I held her. She looked at me. She just said, 'It is cold, coal,' and then she was gone. I sat there, holding her, for hours. I sat there until the sun went down. I was too late." He had never said these words to anyone. He had said them to the dirt. He had said them to the whiskey bottle. Now he had said them to Eleanor. She looked at him, her eyes clear and deep. They were not full of pity. They were full of understanding. "My lie was worse," she said, her voice low. He frowned, confused. "What lie?" "The man who came here. When you were hunting, he was not a peddler. Cole sat up straighter, a new tension in his shoulders. I knew it. I knew you lied. Your hands were shaking when you told me. Who was he? His name is Silas Croft. He knew me from back home, from before. She stood up, needing to move. She walked to the dark window, her back to him. My name is not Eleanor, she said. He waited. My name is Anna. Anna. My last name was Bishop. She took a deep breath. My first husband. His name was Arthur. He was a kind man, at first, full of soft words. He married me for my father's land. When he had sold the last of it, for drink and for cards, his soft words stopped. His hands did not. Cole's own hands clenched into fists. He knew this story. He had seen it. I tried to leave him. He caught me. He did not like his property trying to escape. He beat me. He broke 2 of my ribs, and he locked me in the root cellar. He told me he would let me rot. Then he rode away. The cabin was so quiet. Cole could hear the blood pounding in his own ears. I was in there for 2 days. In the dark, I thought I was going to die. A neighbor, Mr. Abernathy, he found me. He was looking for a stray cow. Arthur, he never came back. He fell from his horse, drunk, and broke his neck on the road. She turned to face him. When I heard he was dead, I did not feel grief. I felt nothing. I sold what was left, the scraps, and I bought a letter that promised me a new life, with a new name. Eleanor, I came here. Silas Croft, she continued. He was one of Arthur's friends. He came here to get money. He said Arthur owed him. He said he knew the truth. He said some people back home thought I had killed Arthur, that I had arranged it. He said you would throw me out when you knew. He said I was ruined, she had told him. The worst of it, the lie, the cellar, the murder her husband had committed in her soul. Cole looked at her, at Anna, at Eleanor, at this woman who had shot a man through her kitchen door, who had buried 3 bodies, who had nursed him back from the edge of death. He did not feel anger. He did not feel betrayal. He felt a profound, aching recognition. He locked you in a cellar, Cole said, his voice quiet. And you survived. He looked at her, truly seeing her for the first time, not as a mail-order bride, not as a replacement, not as a burden. You survived, he said again. That is what matters. That night, the wall between them, the one built of cots and ghosts, crumbled. He was strong enough to sit in the chair. She was cleaning the cabin, putting things back in order. The air was charged, new. They had exchanged their deepest wounds. They had given each other their pasts. The moon was high, flooding the cabin with a clean, silver light. It was brighter than the candle. Eleanor stopped her work. She stood in the center of the room, in a patch of moonlight. She was looking at him. He was right, in a way, she said, her voice so soft he barely heard it. Who? Silas Croft. I am ruined. I am not clean. Cole stood. He was weak. His side ached. But he stood. He walked to her, slowly, until he was standing in front of her. He was a fool, Cole said. Eleanor held his gaze. Then her hands went to the buttons at her throat. Slowly, one by one, she undid her dress. Cole, she whispered. A warning, or an invitation. I am here, he said. She let the dress fall from her shoulders. She wore a thin chemise beneath. She turned, her back to him, her shoulders bathed in the pale moonlight. Her back was not smooth. It was a map of her past, a landscape of pain, thin, white, silvery lines, the memory of Arthur's rage, written on her skin. Scars, long, faded, but undeniable. Cole lifted his hand. It was shaking, just as it had shaken that night by the barn. This was a different kind of tremor. He was not afraid. He was in the presence of something holy. He touched one. His fingers, rough, calloused, traced the line. From her shoulder blade down to her rib. She flinched, but did not pull away. She just closed her eyes, her breath hitching. He touched another, and another. He traced the story of her survival, his touch reverent, gentle. He was a man who understood scars. His were on the inside. Hers were here, in the moonlight, for him to see. He leaned in. He did not kiss her mouth. He put his lips to her neck, just below her ear, his breath warm on her skin. "You are not broken," he whispered, his voice thick. "You are not ruined. You are forged." She leaned her head back against his shoulder. A single tear escaped her closed eye, tracing a path through the dust on her cheek. She turned in his arms, her face buried in his chest. He held her. His hand strove refs haps wbu. Google, com, search, tell G Joe his scarred back. "Neither are you," she whispered into his shirt. He kissed her then. It was not the desperate, frantic kiss he had pulled away from in the pasture. It was not the kiss he had wanted to give a ghost. It was tentative. At first, a question, a mapping of new territory. It was the taste of salt and dust, and her tears, and his own. And then, it was passionate. It was a hunger not of the body, but of the soul. It was two people who had been utterly alone. Two people who had survived. Two people who had killed, finding the one other person in the world who understood. They were not seeking to forget. They were seeking to be whole. He lifted her, his wound complaining but his arms strong, and carried her to his cot, and for the first time, they were not two strangers in a dark room. They were a man and a woman, seeking comfort and finding truth. The next morning, the light was different. Eleanor woke first. She was curled against him, his arm heavy and warm across her waist. His breathing was deep and even. He was sleeping, truly sleeping, for the first time in years. She rose quietly, put on her dress, and began to make coffee. When he woke, he watched her for a long moment. She was moving in his kitchen, in her kitchen. She was his wife. He sat up, his side pulling, but the pain was dull. He stood, put on his trousers, and walked to the table. He did not go for the coffee. He went to the corner where he had placed his own gun belt. He picked it up. He held it for a long second, the weight of it familiar in his hand. He walked to the table and laid the revolver, his Colt, in the center. "No more guns in this house," he said. His voice was firm. It was a declaration, a promise. He was done with the man he had been. He was done with the violence. He wanted peace. Eleanor turned, the coffee pot in her hand. She looked at the gun. It sat on the wood, dark, heavy, smelling of oil and death. It was the tool that had failed to save Sarah. It was the tool that had saved him from the outlaws. She walked to the table. She put the coffee down. She reached out, and her fingers, the ones he had bandaged, gently, tentatively, touched the weapon. She did not grab it. She just laid her hand over the cold steel and the wooden grip. "They are part of you, Cole," she said, her voice soft. "Just like my back is part of me. You cannot put them away. They do not own you, but they are part of your story." He looked at her hand on his gun. She was not afraid of it. She was not afraid of him. He put his hand over hers, his hand, covering hers, covering the gun. "You are right," he said. He picked up the revolver, checked its load, and slid it back into its holster. But he did not put the gun belt on. He hung it on the peg by the door. A tool, not a shield. A week later, he was strong enough to walk, but not to ride. They needed supplies. The town had not seen them since the day of the Miller raid. "I will go," Eleanor said. "No, it is not safe. That man, Silas, I am not afraid of him," she said. "And I am not Anna. I am Eleanor Rollins. I am your wife. I am going to town." She hitched the old mule to the small wagon they had repaired from the wreckage of the barn. She rode into redemption, her head high. The town was just as she had left it, but the whispers were different. She walked into the general store. Mrs. Gable and Mrs. Hemlock were there, as always. They stopped talking when they saw her. They did not look away in pity. They stared. They saw a woman who was not the pale, sunburnt mail-order bride who had arrived weeks ago. They saw a woman with purpose in her step, with a stillness in her eyes. "Mrs. Rollins." "Mr." Hemlock said, his voice holding a new respect. We heard the smoke. We thought." "We are fine," Eleanor said, her voice clear. "My husband was wounded, but he is recovering. I need flour, salt, and cartridges for a colt." The women stared. "Heard she fought them off herself." "Mrs." Gable whispered, not quite quietly enough. "Killed one, they say, right through the door." "Mrs." Hemlock whispered back. "And Cole, they say he is a different man. He is staying in the house. She is not just a cook. After all." Eleanor paid for her supplies. She did not acknowledge their whispers. She did not need to. She walked out of the store, loaded her wagon, and turned the mule for home. The sun was on her face. For the first time, she did not feel the need to hide from it. She held her head high, the dust of the road rising around her, and she was not running. She was going home. The high desert winter was a trial of ice and wind. It scoured the land, burying the graves by the creek under a hard sheet of white and testing the flimsy patches on the cabin walls. But inside, there was warmth. Cole's wound healed slowly, a thick, puckered scar on his side that he carried as a new reminder. But as the wound on his body closed, the old, raw wounds of his heart began to follow. The barrier of the two cots was gone. They slept in his bed, a single mattress that held two bodies against the cold. They slept not with the desperate passion of their first night, but with the quiet, profound comfort of two people who had found an anchor in a storm. In the deep of the night, if he cried out from a dream of smoke and gunfire, her hand would find his. When she shivered, her back rigid with the memory of a cold cellar, he would pull the heavy wool blanket tighter, his arm a solid, living wall. Months passed. The snow melted, running in dark, muddy streams down the dry washes. The sun returned, and with it, a fragile, pale green covered the hills. Life returned to the ranch, slowly, stubbornly. Cole was strong enough to work. Together, they rebuilt the barn. It was a slow, arduous task. They salvaged what charred timber they could and rode the mule wagon 20 miles to the nearest stand of pine to cut new lumber. They did not talk much as they worked. They did not need to. The rhythm of the hammer and the saw was their new language. He would hold a beam, his muscles straining, and she would be there to set the peg. She would measure a board, and he would cut it. His line true. They were a team, their bodies moving in a new harmony born of shared labor and survival. Eleanor's garden, the small, defiant patch of dirt she had clawed from the earth, thrived. The seeds she had planted in desperation, watered by the creek and fertilized with ash from the burned barn, had taken root, small. Determined shoots of squash and beans pushed their way toward the sun, and in the new sturdy barn, a foal was born, a long-legged, trembling creature, spun from the mare they had thought lost, who had returned on her own a month after the raid. Eleanor and Cole had stood in the hay, watching the new mother clean her baby, and the shared, quiet miracle of it felt like a blessing. One evening, Cole sat at the table, mending a bridle, the leather dark in his hands. Eleanor was at the hearth, stirring a stew. The cabin was clean, peaceful. It smelled of food and wood smoke. And her. He got up. He went to the small chest in the corner, the one that had held Sarah's things. He had not opened it since that night. He lifted the lid. He reached inside, past the folded calico dress, and his fingers closed around a small, velvet box. He walked back to her. "Eleanor?" She turned, a question in her eyes. He opened the box. Inside, on a bed of faded silk, was a small, silver locket. It was simple, worn smooth with time. "It was my mother's," he said, his voice rough. "I gave it to Sarah. When we were married." Eleanor's breath caught. She looked from the locket to his face. She would have wanted someone," he faltered. The old words, the old grief, were still there, but they no longer had the same power. She was a good woman, Eleanor. She deserved better than this land, better than me. She was brave, Eleanor said softly. Her journal, the flower she pressed. She loved you. I know. He took the locket from the box. The chain was delicate. I do not want to replace her. You know that. I could not. I know, she whispered. But this locket, it is not for a ghost. It is for the lady of this house. And that is you. He stepped behind her. His hands, calloused and scarred, fumbled with the tiny clasp. She lifted her hair, her skin warm against his knuckles. He fastened the locket around her neck. It settled against her skin, cold at first, then warming. She wore it. She wore it not as a replacement for the woman who had died. She wore it as a remembrance of the life that had been, and a promise for the life that was. Spring deepened. The world felt new. They had, against all odds, found a fragile peace. The telegram arrived on a hot afternoon in May. Cole had ridden to Redemption for salt and news. Eleanor was weeding the garden, her locket tucked into her dress. When she saw him riding back, he was riding too fast. A cold dread, a feeling she had not felt in months, seized her. She stood, wiping the dirt from her hands. As he reined his horse to a skidding stop by the porch, his face was a mask she had not seen since the winter. It was the hard, closed face of the soldier. Cole, what is it? He did not speak. He swung down from the horse and held out a piece of thin, yellow paper, a telegram. Her hands trembled as she took it. It was from Mr. Abernathy, her old neighbor, the man who had found her in the cellar. The words were stark. Anna, he is out. Silas Croft, escaped Yuma prison, jailed for robbery. He was asking after you. He knows the name Rawlins. Coming west. Be safe. Hide. He had escaped prison. Yuma. He had been close all this time, locked away for other crimes. And now he was coming. He was coming for her. The past was not buried. It was just delayed. Pack your things, Cole said. His voice was flat, devoid of emotion. He was already moving toward the cabin. What? Pack. We are leaving. We will ride north, to Wyoming. I know folks there. We can start over. He will not find us. He was not asking. He was telling. He was going into his old pattern. Protect, fortify, run! Eleanor stood frozen, the yellow paper rattling in her hand. Hide. The word felt like a slap. No, she said. Cole stopped, his hand on the cabin door. He turned, his eyes narrowing. This is not a discussion. Eleanor, not like before. This is not some outlaw raid. This is him. This is the man from your past. He is not coming for cattle. He is coming for you. I will not let him find you. And what about our home? She cried, gesturing to the new barn, to her garden, to the cabin they had rebuilt with their own hands. What about the foal? What about the fences? We run. We just give it all up? It is just wood, he bit out. It is just dirt. I can build another barn. I cannot. I will not lose you. The words, I will not lose you, hung in the air. He was not talking about losing her. He was talking about losing again. He was back at the creek. Cole, she said, walking toward him, her voice desperate. You said it yourself. I survived. I survived Arthur. I survived Silas. I survived the raid. I will not run from this. I will not hide in a cellar again. This is not a cellar. This is me, protecting my wife, he roared, his fear making him cruel. I am the man here. I say we leave. And I am the woman, she said, her voice rising to meet his, who will not be defined by the men who try to break her. I am not Anna Bishop, the victim. I am Eleanor Rawlins, your wife, and I am staying. I will not let him take this from me. I will not let him take you from me. You are a fool, then, he seethed, turning his back on her. You are a fool, and you will get us both killed. No, she said, her voice dropping, suddenly calm, resolute. We will finish this, here, together. I will not hide. Not anymore." He stood there, his back to her, a rigid line of anger and terror. He knew that tone. It was the same one she had used when she told him she was cleaning Sarah's gun. It was final. He slammed his fist against the doorframe, the wood groaning in protest. "Damn it, Eleanor, damn it all!" He turned, his face haggard. "Then we fight. We fight him here." They did not have to wait long. He must have been following the telegram line. The final confrontation came at sunset. The sky bled orange and deep, arterial red, as if the day itself were wounded. Cole stood on the porch, his rifle in his hand. He had not put on his gun belt. He was a rancher, protecting his home, not a scout looking for war. Eleanor stood beside him. She was not holding a gun, but in the deep pocket of her apron, her hand was closed around the cool, smooth grip of Sarah's revolver. He appeared at the edge of the property, just as the outlaws had. A single rider, Silas Croft. He did not look like the man in the rumpled suit. Prison had hollowed him out, burned away the soft edges. He was thin, gaunt, his eyes burning with a feverish desperation. He looked like a wolf that had chewed off its own leg to escape a trap. He dismounted, his movements jerky, and walked toward the cabin. He had a gun in his hand, held loosely at his side. "Anna," he called, his voice a dry rasp. "I told you I would find you. You should not have run." "My name is Eleanor," she called back. Her voice was clear, and it did not tremble. Cole raised his rifle, sighting down the barrel. "That is far enough. Croft." "You are not welcome here. Turn around and ride away." Silas laughed, a dry, coughing sound. "And go where? Back to Yuma? Back to that hellhole? No, I came for what I am owed. She," he pointed at Eleanor, "took everything from me. She ruined me. She owes you nothing," Cole said. "This is your last warning. She owes me her life," Silas snarled. "She should have died in that cellar. If she had, Arthur would be alive. I would have my money. It is all her fault." He was a man undone, his mind twisted by failure, blaming the one person who had survived his poison. "This is not your story. Silas," Eleanor said, stepping forward. "Eleanor, no!" Cole barked, his rifle still trained on the man. She ignored him, taking one more step. So she was standing just in front of her husband. She held her hand up, palm out, a gesture to stop. She looked at the broken man in the yard. "You are not my story anymore," she said, her voice ringing in the twilight. "You are not my master. You are not my past. You are just the part I lived through." She turned her head, just enough to look at Cole, at his fierce, protective face. Then she looked back at Silas. "He," she said, gesturing to Cole, "is the part I choose." It was her choice, her declaration, her final, absolute freedom. For Silas, it was the final, unbearable rejection. With a scream of pure, animal rage, he lunged. He was not lunging for Cole. He was lunging for her, his gun coming up. Cole started to pull the trigger, but a different gun went off. The sound was sharp, a crack that was louder than Cole's rifle, but smaller. Silas stopped. He froze, his body rigid. He looked down, a look of profound, stupid surprise on his face. A dark, blossoming stain was spreading on his right shoulder. Eleanor stood, her arm outstretched, smoke curling from the barrel of Sarah's revolver. She had not aimed for his heart. She had aimed for his shoulder. It was not vengeance. It was justice. It was an ending. Silas dropped his gun. He clutched his shoulder, his face white with shock and pain. He looked at her, at the smoking gun, at the woman he could not break. He turned. He ran, stumbling, weeping, holding his ruined arm. He ran to his horse, hauled himself into the saddle, and fled, disappearing into the growing darkness. Cole stood, his rifle still raised. His knuckles were white. He watched the man flee. He was a black speck against the dying light. Cole began to raise the rifle higher, settling the stock against his shoulder. He was sighting for a long shot, a shot in the back, the scout's shot, the one that finishes things, the one that makes sure the threat never, ever returns. He would not be too late. His finger tightened on the trigger. "Cole!" Her voice was soft. He felt her hand, gentle, on his arm, the one holding the rifle. She did not pull, she did not force him. She just rested her hand there. He looked at her. Her face was pale, streaked with gunpowder, but her eyes were clear. They were not asking him to spare a man. They were asking him to save himself. He looked back at the fleeing shape. He could make the shot. He knew he could. He could end the last thread of her past. He let out a long, slow breath. The breath he had been holding for 2 winters. He lowered the rifle. He let go of his hate. He let go of the man who had sat by a grave and talked to the dirt. He let go of the man who was always too late. He chose love. He chose her. He chose this life. He turned and let the rifle drop, leaning it against the porch rail. The final image was not of violence, but of peace. They stood on the porch, the 2 of them, as the sky bled its last color and the first stars appeared. The new barn stood dark and strong behind them. The air was cool, carrying the smell of her garden and the dust. His revolver, the one he had worn for years, the one that had defined him. He had left it inside. It sat on the windowsill, a piece of metal, a tool no longer needed. Eleanor put her hand, the one that still smelled of gunpowder, over his, the one that had let the rifle go. They rested together on the porch rail. She leaned her head against his shoulder. "We are more than what they said we were," she whispered into the twilight. "More than a mail-order bride, more than a broken widower, more than a victim, more than a killer." He turned his head, his rough cheek brushing her hair. He looked out at the vast, quiet land that was, finally, their home. "You saved me," he replied, his voice thick. "You saved me just by not leaving. Thank you for listening to our story. We would love to hear your thoughts, so please comment with where you are listening from to connect with fellow fans. Subscribe to the Wild West Campfire channel and share your thoughts in English.